So, here on the Motoring Chronicle, we love going through some of your most popular questions on the internet, and I've got one today that I am sure will not ignite any sort of debate, will not annoy anybody, and it won't be controversial at all. But it's one when I saw it, I thought, you know what, I need to talk about this, I need to give my thoughts on it. Because I've already done a similar video already going into which demographic, which age group, which generation is the safest in terms of their driving technique and also the stats behind it. So that's more of a stats driven one. If you want to go check that out, go for it. But this video today is just kind of an opinion one really, because there is no one size fits all kind of box to put everybody into within an age group. You've got people who are very good drivers at certain ages and very bad drivers at certain ages, and that can go for young, middle-aged, old, everybody, right? But the question today is, do drivers get worse with age? Right, so depending on how you answer this question is going to, well, it's going to vary what the actual result of it is basically. So I'll just give my thoughts on it. So statistically, when it comes to drivers, and I think this was a study in the United States, and I imagine it's quite similar for most Western countries and probably most countries in general, to be fair. But statistically, the safest drivers in terms of accidents that they're in overall are the boomers. The people that are now aged somewhere between 50 and 65, something like that. And the reason for this, I believe, is that is probably the oldest age in general. I mean, everybody's different, everybody has different health conditions. Like my nan, for example, she's in her 80s, right? But she's still in really good shape. Whereas a lot of people that age are not. They're really struggling to do the most basic things. It does vary, but in general, I would say that's the kind of oldest age where your health is not taking too much of an impact on your driving. Now, I am sure there'll be plenty of boomers watching this that will probably say, hang on a minute, what about my dodgy knee? What about my dodgy neck? What about my dodgy legs or shoulders or whatever? Sure, a lot of people that age have some sort of problem. A lot of people my age have problems like that. I know people my age who've got bad backs and all sorts of stuff, Age is not a definer when it comes to ability, absolutely not. But you're kind of more experienced by that point, right? Now, most people who are boomers have been driving for 40, 50 years in some aspects, so they're very, very experienced, and I feel like that, despite potential physical ailments and things like eyesight as well, all that can all be overcome just through experience, just by knowing how to drive around it, for example, things like that. So I feel like that is an explanation of why that generation, why that age group is statistically the safest drivers. On the flip side, you have young people, the millennials, the Gen Zers, people like me, right? In general, statistically, we are the most dangerous drivers on the road. Now, the reason for this is, of course, inexperience. It's not ability. A lot of people my age are really good drivers. I like to think I'm pretty decent. I'm sure some people wouldn't agree with that, but I've never had any complaints. I mean, that's part of it though. It's experience at the end of the day. And unfortunately, there are quite a few people my sort of age that drive way too quickly, and it only takes one moment to make a mistake, blind corner, bad conditions, bump in the road, hell, a problem with your car even, if you get a puncture when you're doing 60 miles an hour in a 30 zone, you're going to be in trouble probably, I'm not just talking about with the authorities, I'm talking about with your actual well-being at that point, because your car is hurtling towards a tree potentially or something. It can happen, so I feel like that is part of it too. If I were to, I mean, I'm not going to get any web pages up or anything like that. I've looked up a few different sources and they're all basically saying the same thing that I'm saying here. If you were to draw a graph of driver safety, in general, it will be a bell curve where the top of that curve is around the boomer age, around 45 to 65 roughly, let's just say that, right? So that's a bit outside the boomer range, but you know what I mean. They would be the safest, and then it would be a gentle decrease before it where people younger than boomers, the 40s, the 35s, the 30s, the 25s, all the way down. It would probably be a bell curve that goes all the way down there, with the youngest drivers, the 18-year-olds, the 21-year-olds, those being the most unsafe. But on the flip side of that too, if you go older than the boomers, if you go over 60, over 65, 70, 75, I think those people are more dangerous. And statistically they are. The 70 plussers are almost as dangerous as those millennials. And the reason for that, again, that is when health really starts to take a toll on things like driving, you know. Again, this isn't for everybody, right? My auntie still drives. She's 80 years old. I don't think she's ever been in a traffic accident, right? But I tell you what, she drives very slowly, as most elderly people do. Why? Because they're more cautious. And that's not the worst thing at the end of the day, but you do see some very bizarre incidents, the absolute worst case scenarios of drivers, particularly in the UK. I don't know if this is the case for all countries. I absorb a lot of UK news, but how often do you hear, and this is something that's been reiterated for a long time, since back in the days when I used to watch Top Gear, back when Top Gear was a program, and back when Top Gear was a good program as well, right? I'm talking about the original trio here, you know what I'm talking about. But they always say, and they're absolutely right, you never hear about, if you hear about an accident with an 18-year-old driver, he's usually doing 50 in a 30 zone, for example, right? Which is just stupid. Don't do that. Why would you do that? But what you do hear about with elderly people is that they'll go down the motorway the wrong way, which is unbelievably dangerous, right? And there have been many recorded incidents of that happening. And that'll happen on smaller scale as well, going down the wrong side of the road. Just general kind of brain fade, because unfortunately, a lot of these people that are very elderly, they'll either just not realise they're doing anything wrong, and tragically as well, some of them might have undiagnosed dementia, things like that. They might not even realise they're doing anything wrong. They might not realise anything is wrong with them. But an incident like this could cause them to get checked up and then realise, oh, you've got a real problem here, you know. And that's an extreme example. They might not have a health condition like that at that age, but they can still make mistakes. And the stats back it up as well. Elderly people of that age are relatively likely to get in accidents just like us. So do drivers get worse with age? Well, physically, yes they do, right? There's no debate about that. That is without a doubt. On average, they have more health conditions, they are less able, their reaction times are slower, but for the most part, unless they're very old, those factors don't really negatively affect them too much when driving. They just compensate in other ways. It's not something that's really going to turn them into a bad driver. And I honestly would go along with the fact that I'd say probably anybody 40 up to about 60 in general, those are probably the best drivers on the road in the UK. In my experience anyway, I'd go along with that. People my age in general, there's quite a few bad apples in there, and people very old, 70 plus, quite a few of them shouldn't be driving, quite frankly. It's just a fact of life. But you get some people that you can't go taking people's licenses off and stuff like that, like some people are advocating for, because, you know, you get people that are like nearly 100 years old and they're absolutely fine driving. You know, driving a little slowly, it's not illegal. It might annoy you if you're caught behind them, but it's not illegal. Think about how people actually pass the driving test. Those are the worst drivers I've ever seen. But it's just because they're going within the confines of the rules of the road to pass their test. And I've said this many a time, to pass the driving test in the UK, you have to drive like an absolute tool. You've got to drive like a complete weapon, right? But that's how they want you to drive when you pass. And then really elderly people kind of go back into that mould. They don't want to take risks. They take their time. Their reaction times are slower. Their vision might be worse. Again, and I can't talk because I wear glasses. My vision's pretty bad for my age, you know? Although my optician said they're not too bad, but I respectfully disagree with that. I could never pass the license plate test thing they had on the driving test. I could never see that without my glasses. So legally, I got to wear these bad boys wherever I go, or sunglasses that are prescription as well. So yeah. Anyway, I'm digressing. So do drivers get worse with age? In a sense, physically, yes, they do. But in terms of their safety, in terms of their conduct on the road, it doesn't really affect them too much in general, until they get very elderly, until they get 70 plus, I'd say. Then it starts to become apparent. Those are, for me, probably the worst drivers on the road. Worse than us young guns and millennials and Gen Zers and all that. I would say so personally, but I think at the same time, at our age, we should know better than what we do. But some people are good, some people are bad. Doesn't matter how old you are, you can still get in a car accident. It happens. But yeah, guys, what do you think? Do drivers get worse with age? Do they get better with age? Are they like a fine wine? Let us know in the comments below. And of course, keep it subscribed to themotoringchronicle.com for much more news and opinions and analysis on the world of motoring, just like this. Have a good one, guys. See you later.